Hello, it's Eric Westgard, amateur call November Yankee Niner Delta, and this is an unofficial trip report from the Minnesota Communications exercise called Northstar 3, held August 17th to the 21st, 2025 up in Camp Ripley. Again, I'm from the Minnesota Area's events department. Again, a lot of marathons and parades and bike races, as well as from the Minnesota VOAD Radio Club, where we do a lot of volunteer disaster recovery work. So the event was held up at Camp Ripley, a major regional training facility for military as well as organizations like the Minnesota State Patrol. It has extensive facilities. There's a pretty good sized airfield, about 6,100-foot runway. They operate C-130s as well as a range of helicopters. They have a paratroop drop zone. There's an artillery range as well as a place to operate tracked vehicles. So it's really a real military base with full facilities. We had 100 participants this year from all sorts of agencies, cities, counties, state agencies, some federal folks, some task forces from different groups. It was really a wide variety of different organizations were represented. The main objective was to restore interoperable communications after a simulated natural disaster. In this case, it was a 5.1 magnitude earthquake centered in a place called Poppy County, city of Henwood. And city of Henwood turned out to be up in the firing range area of the base, and it was we had a lot of fun with that. We also had 17 communications unit leader candidates trying to complete their task books. There was a big training class earlier in the year, and they had gone to the classes, they had attended the material, attended the lectures, and now they were ready to get signed off on the tasks. Many of these, I had dinner with them one night, were supervisors from 911 centers. They were generally young and had a lot of emergency communications, dispatching ambulances and heart attacks at 2 a.m. kind of experience, but they had not been out in the field doing, radio stuff with radio towers and generators and all that. So this was an ideal chance for them as well as to work in an emergency operations center setting. So Aries Amateur Radio Emergency Services has been involved in this for 5 years. We've been invited pretty much the whole time in really two roles. First is the FEMA NIMS auxiliary communications role. This was established a few years ago as a place for us in the hierarchy, as well as a new role for us, the field observer. This came from Dr. Gwen Martin from the city of Cottage Grove, who we had an exercise with in her city back in 2022, and she's, boy, you'd be great as field observers, providing a flow of information up through the planning team and on up to leadership, to really have a situational awareness and kind of, dispel the fog of war, which has been around a long time, but is very much a real thing in 2025. We brought some hardware up there. We brought Truck 23, our converted TV news gathering van, which with a 42-foot air tower, one of our 30-foot diesel tower trailer, generator trailers, as well as a Starlink, a bunch of mesh equipment, some tactical fiber, etc. And again, I wasn't really sure what to bring, brought as much equipment as possible, not knowing in any detail what was going to happen. And we did get some minor compliments. There were a fair number of paid agency reps who were on a work day who had ham licenses, and they had to be careful because amateur radio is strictly a voluntary service. But we got a few positive comments and a few hints and things. And we had kind of a little aux kind of help desk in the back of the room if anyone had questions about field radio deployment and that sort of thing. So day one was a travel day. Again, we're about, Camp Ripley is about 2 hours from the Twin Cities and really in the middle of the state, very conveniently located for essentially everybody. Area familiarization, some safety briefings, ticks, spiders, mosquitoes, sunburn, 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So we had to really be careful of marching troops and tracked vehicles and really, no talking on your cell phone while you're driving, etc. So we had to avoid breaking the rules up there. Again, gracious hosts, but we had to kind of follow the procedures. There was an aircraft capabilities and safety talk. Emergency managers are able, through the chain of command, to sign out military helicopters for certain missions. And we had to learn about the capabilities and the carrying capacity and the different safety things you had to do around that equipment. And then there was a vendor partner trade show, and we were not really sure what this was, but we got to show off the equipment and give tours to the really the trainees. I think were the or the candidates were the audience for this, as well as other agencies. The standing joke for us, they said, "Where do you get your funding?" And the answer was Social Security. So that was good. There were tower trailers, deployable cell towers. I call them sort of portable cell towers. Satellite to cell was talked about. So the radio vendors were there, and some communications truck. The one in the picture is from Washington County, which they ended up using in the main part of the exercise. So day 2, we had briefings and a full search and rescue exercise. One of the teams went up and did a big search in a very remote area, far in the farther northern part of the base. And then we had most of us went to a helicopter familiarization exercise at the Forward Ammunition Supply Point, FASP, which is about, I'd say, 5 air miles from the main air base, which is on the southern end of the base. And it was a little bit longer by dirt road. We had to run a military convoy up there to it was escorted through the area to get to the place. It had one magical feature: no cell service. So it was really a good exercise especially if you're Gen Z and you're pulling out your cell phone every 20 seconds. It just didn't work up there, and that was really a good chance to think about, okay, this is an emergency. We've had a 200-mile-per-hour windstorm or a horrible earthquake. Everything's down, and I need to rely exclusively on my emergency communications equipment that's been deployed to the scene. So we had, as ham/UCC, reliable instant VHF communications. We brought, again, 10 to 42 feet of tower with us. 2 of them actually. Benton back at the base, really at the EOC/classroom area where was kind of the headquarters, brought 10 feet of TV mast and an antenna called the GP3, which is about 5 feet long. And so we were solid the whole time. No one seemed very impressed by that, but we were happy to have the comms. And when we weren't doing requested tasks, we were sending out sit reps, our what we call our KNP reports: conditions, actions, needs, plus a personnel or part check about every half hour, and that landed up through the planning desk on the planning team on the desk of the of incident command. So they had a report of what was happening out there, regardless of the other kinds of issues and communications problems. Lots of equipment problems. I think this was by design. We had to get that equipment out of the warehouses, out of the barns, and get it tested. And towers got stuck. The 2 portable cell towers, one was down all day Tuesday. The other was down just for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The battery went dead. There were various things. We helped them troubleshoot that with a voltmeter and some wrenches, and got them back on the air. So again, the whole point of these functional exercises is to test equipment, test procedures, and get the cobwebs off of your techniques and your procedures and your processes. So day 3 was actually the exercise play. So we had 5 sites. We had a bunch of candidates needing EOC sign off, so we had to have 3 OCs. And in retrospect, we probably should have had hierarchical. We did that with an exercise in Cottage Grove a couple years ago. We had city, county, and state EOCs simulated. The paperwork would flow up as opposed to across 3 of them. Again, we went up, and a couple of us went up in convoy up to the FASP site, and again, we had reliable VHF comms from there, able to send the KNP reports, as well as we set up WinLink with VHF, and I actually had some issues with my VHF WinLink setup, so I did WinLink over Telnet over Starlink, which worked fine from up there. Day 4 was the formal hot wash / after action review. Again, very detailed, went around the room, everybody got their input. A lot of requests for more exercises, more regional exercises, out in places like Duluth and Rochester, where the trainees and candidates wouldn't have to travel as far. And again, the whole exercise was evaluated with HC, Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Protocol. It's a complicated process. The book is like 60 pages. we've taught ourselves this process using some templates, and I think we signed up to help them out planning with the 2026 events. There's a lot of planning that goes into this, as well as trying to get more exercises going really around the state to help out everyone. So some lessons learned. Again, unofficially, we should have brought more tower trailers. 30 feet of steel tower, radio tower really solves a lot of problems in the emergency communications world. You can put HF, VHF, you can put a Starlink up there, you can put a repeater on there. And again, we only brought one. We should have brought the whole fleet or part of the fleet. Mesh networking, Ubiquiti Unify was in many of the kits. Talking to the different groups, they're talking about what they brought and what was available. And that equipment has two advantages. One, it's very good in outdoors. Most of it's outdoor rated. And the second part is the license fees are prepaid. So if you have budget in 2025 and zero budget in 2026, and you're not stuck with having to pay an annual license fee. So those are one of the reasons that we like it. You don't get much time to set up and tear down. I think if you have fussy equipment and you want to take an hour getting set up, that's fine, except the whole exercise play was only like 3 hours. So we had a line formed outside, people wanting messages sent within 10 minutes of arrival. So we felt that was important. I'm not a fan of near vertical incident skywave communications, which is very, very popular. They couldn't get it to work. And I had equipment for it, but didn't really have the licensing for what was needed. And it was not on my radar. And certainly if it's needed, on the other hand, if the events and disasters are run on WebEOC, but it's part of the package and something to think about. The Starlink dishes were useful. I saw around 5 up there. We brought ours. One of them helped out get one of the little portable cell towers working again. The IT department had one. There were several others that I saw on some of the various vehicles. Coming from the events side and the disaster recovery side of Ares, I was amazed at how critical the ICS forums were to this communications unit work. Again, this was kind of new to me. I did learn auxiliary communications truly occupies and owns the bottom rung of the chain of command. So if I'm used to a big marathon where I'm bossing around a team to get things going, that was not a good thing up here for us. The Guard members were friendly, professional, and engaged, very much part of the team, gracious host. It was really quite amazing and lovely, very proud of their work. And then we brought some other equipment that we showed off, didn't actually get a chance to use, tactical single mode fiber, wireless bridge, a whole bunch of mesh equipment. Again, we could have covered the FASP area for internet if we'd needed it and had more staffing and more time. Some more lessons learned. I have a friend of mine who's a COMMEL candidate as well, and talks to me about really government talk groups are the be all to end all of emergency communications. I'm not sure that's true anymore. Looking at the ESF framework from FEMA, this notion of whole community, considering all the volunteers, there's 90,000 radios in the Minnesota, the lovely Minnesota government radio system called Armor, but does every volunteer group have a radio? Is everybody in the system? If you have, volunteers coming up from, Tennessee or from, someplace else, do they have the radio? So it's certainly one of the tools, not the only tool. Learned that air-to-ground communications with Minnesota military aircraft is on the P-25 system. But if you have, Coast Guard helicopter coming in from Chicago or from Cleveland, they are not going to have the Minnesota radios and the Minnesota talk group in there, possibly not the Minnesota frequencies. U.S. Air Force aircraft may not. So it again is one of these that, it solves a near-term, short-term, small issue. Does it solve a larger issue? I felt the auxiliary communications capabilities were undervalued. It seemed like the primary focus was getting some of the government stuff going, as well as certainly some of the internet and web capability going. And a lot of hams, the dream is to be stationed in the EOC, but if you're basically sitting there for 2 days moving a few forms around, you've got $5,000 of radio gear sitting in your truck. Is this really your dream? And the answer is I don't think so, certainly not for me. If your gear does fail out in the field, you don't have an hour to troubleshoot plan A, you have to move rapidly, I believe, to plan B and plan C to get your, accomplish the mission, get through the exercise, and, whether you did it with plan A or plan C, I don't think anybody really cares. And then, once in a while you get injects which affect this as well, is to rapidly get moving. We had a request, for example, on Tuesday morning. They wanted live video from the helicopter event back to the EOC. Again, left most of the video equipment at home, didn't have a laptop with an Ethernet, which I needed to program the camera. We didn't have internet, so we, the FirstNet folks were hanging around up there. We grabbed a high-powered portable access point in a suitcase, put that on the roof of the van, got my phone and set up a Zoom call with one of our spare laptops. And, or actually it wasn't Zoom, it was Microsoft Teams. Worked fine. It wasn't great. Duct taped the camera onto a tripod that I brought. It wasn't the camera, it was actually my phone. It was not great, but it got the job done. But thinking about, okay, we should have brought the video equipment, we should have brought more laptops, Ethernet adapters, etc. Again, a good exercise in planning and thinking ahead, whatever. The other thing is, they kept saying, okay, we've got band 14, which is the FirstNet cellular working again. That's government only. And I'm like, okay, the Red Cross has 90% of their disaster recovery workforce is civilian. It's volunteers. Not everybody has, a FirstNet SIM in their cell phone. And, if you're in a town and, the hurricane or the earthquake has come through and the only automated teller machine in town is broken and it's been 3 days, and restoring government cell service is really interesting if the citizens can't buy diapers and formula, so or bread. So I think it's a complicated question of what does communications restoration really mean. The IT folks were there. This is from the Information and Communications Technology, ICT. This is a new thing from FEMA and some of the agencies that are developing emergency communications protocol, where really IT, especially if you're running the event on something like WebEOC, is critical as opposed to just voice radio. So that was, I felt that was a positive step. And as a former IT geek myself, I was very pleased to see that. Other observations, certainly around the mess hall and out in the hall, a lot of discussion of the cost of the government P25 radios. Is $6,000 a good deal? And the accessories and the licensing fees, and are there alternatives? There's a technology / standard called mission critical push to talk. We actually had a briefing on that. Letting you do essentially voice on a cellular device. These LTE radios you're starting to see where it has a little chip. It's essentially an Internet of Things chip that uses the portion of the cell network to move packets around. You can actually have, it's a little radio that works over cellular. One hint here is make sure that the server for that is not in places like China if you're doing, government type work. Competing radio vendors, somebody like Kenwood says, hey, our radios are half the price. Is that, so a lot of conversation around that. Again, I think I talked about, we brought one of our portable repeater when our tower trailer was written into the script, worked in the parking lot, didn't work for the 3 or 4 miles. Turns out the duplexer was hooked up backwards and couldn't call the guy to get the advice to fix it because the cell phone's working, etc. Wi-Fi calling is interesting. If you've got a Starlink or you've got some internet, you do have to set it up with a cell tower, get your 911 address in there. It's an FCC regulation around 911 and getting your location to the PSAP. So you have to sort of pre-plan for that to work. Solar power was popular. I believe the Auxiliary Communications Task Book, which I've reviewed, is out of date. We're not historians. It's 2025, and there's a lot more useful skills that are more than just kind of classic ham radio that need to be in that book. And then one of the search and rescue groups had a really cool kind of 3-fold color brochure talking about their capabilities, and I think we need to get one of those for us. That would be a good learning and lessons learned kind of a thing. Final thoughts. The exercise was, I think, very successful. People were really happy. They learned a lot. A lot of trials and testing, and boy, we didn't know that worked, and what about this? I think really got a lot of creative thinking going on. I felt Aries and Auxcom was valuable, integrated, especially when they kind of made us part of the teams. And there's a path for stronger collaboration, more exercises. I certainly signed up to help us with the planning for next year. And then I had breakfast 2 days with an emergency manager who I hadn't known before, and his comment was, especially as a ham radio operator, don't come into my office and tell me, show me, get out there, demonstrate capabilities, let me see what you can do, and that will get you a greater part in the script for this type of work. So thanks for the time.